We are back, people. What is up? Make sure we're all good here. Another Miami Dolphins live stream. Boom, boom, boom. Analyze. And we're live. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for being in here. What's up, Teddy? How you doing? Patrick Paul time. Yes, it is Patrick Paul time. I don't know. Pretty sure most of you guys probably saw, but Armstead officially retired last night, which I feel like everyone was expecting. I've seen some people freaking out about it a little bit, but I don't feel like it changes that much. The Dolphins, I don't think it changes anything for them. I think they've been expecting this. Even McDaniel said it in an interview a while ago that they've gone into the offseason preparing like he's gonna retire. So they've been playing this out, and I think they were planning it since last season. I think that's the reason they drafted Patrick Paul, who is more of a developmental prospect. And I think Paul showed enough in year one. Like, he's still a question mark for sure, but I think he flashed enough in year one to where they're for sure going to roll with him at left tackle. So I don't think it changes too much in their mind. It sucks. I do agree. I wanted to get younger. I would have liked to have Armstead and Campbell back, but clearly they have other plans. I think the D-line class is still pretty stacked. I think there's still a lot of ways they can get by at that position. Now the room is bare, but I think they can flip that around. O-line, I really don't think losing Armstead changes anything in their mind. Obviously, Armstead's a great player, but I think they were already expecting it to be Patrick Paul. So that's kind of just how it goes. Arguably, it's still very early in the process. I that's why I haven't talked too much about they've improved in some spot, they've gotten worse in other spots. This year is so different compared to the last year's is because you actually have draft picks. You have 10 draft picks. And all the other drafts since McDaniel's been head coach, you've had 4, and then 6 last year. You have 10 this year, and you have potential to actually make a difference with a lot of those. So we'll see if they can nail the draft. I think that is huge, not only for the team's short-term success but long-term. And one thing I've been doing, I've been looking at past draft classes and kind of trying to find some trends. And I've been using relative athletic score like RAS to do it, because I do think there was some trends with the Dolphins, especially with their earlier picks. The sample size is kind of small in the McDaniel era because they didn't have a ton of early picks. But going off that and going a little bit before, I went back to even 2018. I'm going to probably talk about 2020 to 2024 because I think it's more fitting. But yeah, I think a DT in the first is something I like, but I'm getting really heavy on the CB round one train if Barron or Johnson are available. Yeah, I can definitely. Honestly, I think I probably prefer the corners as well over the D tackles, but say if one of them's gone, and we're going to talk about a reason I think they might be hesitant on one of the corners, then I could see them going D-line, but I do think corner and D-line are still the two most likely options, in my opinion, just thinking of what the Dolphins are going to do. Because I think the only O-line they're even would be considering at 13 to me is Membo and Campbell, and I think both are going to be gone. I don't think they're going to take a Tyler Warren. I guess a surprise pick could be an edge, but I still think, we have so many bodies at that spot. They're still probably not going to go in that direction. D-line and corner just feel very, very likely just in this class. So see how it ends up, rolling around. But so I got these trends pulled up. I've got the draft year 2020 to 2024. And it basically comes down to the RAS, and they, especially in the first 2 days, especially with their early picks, they have used a lot of guys that have really high relative athletic score. Last year's draft, we'll use last year's draft first. The 2024 draft. Basically, the only picks that didn't have high RAS were your last two, which were Patrick McMorris and then Taj Washington. I don't even think Taj had an RAS because he didn't do enough testing. But the other ones all did. We have Chop had a 9.72. Patrick Paul was another one that had a really high relative athletic score, being at 9.75. I think those two picks tell me a lot because it was the first time the Dolphins really had. It was the first Mike McDaniel first round pick in his era, which is crazy to think about. And then Patrick Paul was another one that was a higher pick than they usually have had in the McDaniel area. And I feel like those two picks tell me a lot. With one, they were both considered pretty high character guys coming out, high character guys that had really good athletic grades, not only in testing, but on the field. They clearly moved well. So I think athleticism, guys with like higher upside, I think they like high upside guys. I think McDaniel has typically leaned like high upside athletic players. They both have their floors. I think Chop still had a pretty decently high floor. Paul was more of the high ceiling, a little bit of a lower floor type guy, but we'll see if he can reach that ceiling. And then they were both known for being high character, especially Paul, hard workers. Clearly, Chop was a hard worker. I think that's something that plays into it. If you look at all the Dolphins past drafts, a lot of their picks, especially the early ones, were all considered like fairly high character guys, especially except there was one exception who was probably Cam Smith. Cam Smith was seen as kind of like, he was reported to be kind of a diva-ish, but we do know Greer had an inside source because I believe his like son was Cam Smith's roommate or something like that, however that story goes. So maybe he felt more comfortable taking him. But yeah. See, guys, I don't think the Finns are drafting a DB early. I believe they will lean on Storm Duck and draft him late. I don't think they're going to lean on Storm Duck. Like, I think Storm Duck, they like him as a dev, but I think if they go into the season having Storm Duck start at corner, that would be just as bad in my mind as like relying on Eichenberg at guard. Because even though maybe Duck has some upside there, it's just corner is such an important position, even more than like it's one of the, like most important positions, probably top 3 most, in my opinion. Probably top, you can probably argue a little bit lower, but definitely one of the premium spots. And I think it would be a mistake to go into the year with Duck being your number 2 outside guy with Kohu being the nickel. But yeah, I don't mind. I think, I don't mind having Duck around, but I don't like that strategy. I still think they're going to go after a corner pretty early. Yeah. Go here. Okay. Oh yeah, so Chop had a 9.72 RAS. We can go through the first round picks even up to 2020. So we'll go to like the 2020 season. The only one who really, Tua didn't have an RAS because he wasn't, testing. But even in that draft, like Austin Jackson had a 9.49. That was, Greer's GM, 9.49. Noah Igbinoghene had an 8. I feel like 8 and above was kind of the threshold. At least from what I noticed, those guys had pretty good relative athletic scores. 2021, you had Jalen Phillips had a 9.49 relative athletic score. Waddle didn't have one because he didn't test because he was coming off that ankle injury. But I feel like it was fairly obvious to watch the film and know Waddle was an elite athlete, so that kind of plays into it. And then even getting into like second round picks in that draft sort of zone, like Cam Smith, 9.68. Liam Eichenberg actually had an 8.54. Like, this isn't like the end all be all, but I'm just trying to look at trends here. Eichenberg had an 8.54. He was a second round pick in the 2021 class. Javon Holland had a 9.52. Let me see who else. Really kind of the only one that didn't fall into it. Patrick Paul had a 9.67. The only one who didn't was Raekwon Davis. And Raekwon Davis was a pretty well-known, and Robert Hunt didn't test. Raekwon Davis was like a pretty well-known Brian Flores pick. That kind of, doesn't really fall under the umbrella. And then in round 3 picks, Achane actually didn't fall under the threshold, which is funny. His relative athletic score was only a 5.72, which I think is funny, but he was obviously a very elite athlete on tape. Channing Tindall was a 9.68. That was I think that might have been their first pick in the McDaniel era, which is interesting. But I do think those are just signs to look for. Is like in those first 3 rounds, a lot of those guys had high relative athletic scores. There was like 1 or 2 exceptions, and one of the exceptions was the 2 exceptions were basically coach picks, because Achane was one, which was clearly a McDaniel guy, but they even waited around on him. And then Flores was clearly a Raekwon Davis guy because he was so excited about Raekwon in that video, and he's a guy they like a lot. I keep getting Kenneth Grant in the second round. Yeah, those mock drafts are liars because I don't think he's gonna be there in the second round. He might even not even be there in the first round with his stock. And then now when I look at like some guys like Jahdae Barron has an 8.62 RAS. He's high character. He falls under a guy that I think they'll like a lot. Will Johnson has not tested, so I think that puts him in a situation where it's like, they've taken some guys that haven't tested, but they were like elite athletes very obviously on tape. Johnson is more of a good athlete on tape. We don't know how his speed is. I think he's planning to do some testing, so we'll see how it ends up playing out, like some pro day for him. But I do think that, potentially puts a question mark on him. Last year, the Dolphins, because even last year they took Jalen Wright. Jalen Wright had a high RAS and he was a 9.81. I believe even Kamara had a 7.99, so that's pretty good. Malik Washington also had a good RAS. He was, where was he? He was 8.63. Really, the only low one was Nick Morris, who had a 3.72, but that was like, I think they talked about it being like a scout pick, which I thought was interesting. Is Terron Armstead really gone? Yeah, Armstead retired. It was expected, pretty much. I think going into it, we all knew that his body just couldn't hang on to it anymore. Obviously, was a very good player when he played. It's just he had so many injuries. I think even in his speech, he said he's like, I might have been the most injured guy in NFL history. Besides RAS, might physicality be a priority now? Yeah, I think it's something like, I think if you look at this offseason, one thing I've noticed, especially in free agency, is they were attempting to get younger, which obviously through the draft, that doesn't really matter too much because you're going to get younger anyways through the draft. And it looked like they were trying to get more physical at all spots. So physicality, I think, could be something that they are kind of looking, if we're looking at this offseason, could be something they're looking to lean towards. But looking at the past, the trends are pretty high athletic grades with high character for the majority. There are some slight exceptions to the rules, but there was some guys. But yeah. Personally, I would draft it. I think you mean wouldn't. Yeah, wouldn't. Okay. I would take best DT available at trenches at the game. Yeah, trenches do play a big part. I just think that for me, when I look at this, I think in most draft classes, I might agree, but I think when I look at this draft classes specifically, I think I just prefer the second round defensive lineman and the third round defensive lineman than I do the corners. And like the first round corners, I think I prefer over most of the first round D linemen. But it's close. Like I wouldn't be mad with either. I just think this is the best D lineman class I've seen in a very long time. It's so good. Like I think you can get valuable role players that can play a role in year one in like the 5th round, and they would rotate and be a part of it pretty easily. Like that's how good I think this D tackle class is. But we'll see how the Dolphins do. I wouldn't be surprised. One thing though is the one reason I do think D line is still pretty likely, but the one reason I don't think it's a guarantee is because if you go back to the Ravens time, when Weaver was with the Ravens, I don't think they ever took a defensive lineman in round 1. They mostly didn't even take defensive linemen early at all. Like I think the only one they took pretty early was Matabike, and he was a day 2 pick. I do think, and I've said this before, I think if there's one position Weaver can get a lot of production out of with his scheme, it is the interior D line. But I do think they're going to still go pretty draft heavy in this class of D line just because of how stacked it is, and they didn't attack it in free agency like they did last year. However, do you think looking at Greer's drafting history, he will go BPA or will he draft needs? Greer has traditionally been a pretty BPA heavy guy. I think he considers the needs, but he mostly goes BPA at like, and I think this is why I still think it's a BPA at like most positions, like because Dolphins have needs at most spots. Like you can argue, obviously, some spots are much bigger needs than others, but I think it comes down to BPA for the most part. And then if he has guys rated pretty closely, I think he leans towards need. But last year was pretty BPA. Like Chop was more of a BPA pick. Like Edge was a need, but it wasn't the biggest need. And it worked out because Phillips got injured again, and then they drafted Patrick Paul to basically like 2 years in advance. So that was more of like a development high upside, probably BPA on their board if I had to guess, type of pick. I appreciate that blame. I hope they double dip on D-line. I would be pretty surprised if they didn't double dip on D-line in this draft. It's just so stacked. And when you got 10 picks, like every time I do a mock, and obviously these mocks are all, not a lot of them are super accurate, but like some of these D linemen have to fall with just how many good ones there are. Like there's always someone good on the board. And if you do have a BPA philosophy, there's a lot of scenarios where I see D line being BPA, especially in the middle rounds when the Dolphins have like 5 picks between 98 and 155. if Will Johnson isn't available, I think the best option is to trade down. I know you love Barron, but the K-State might be better and available at 98 or 116. Well, I also love the K-State corner. I don't think he's better. If he was better, he would go in the first round. But I do love Jacob Parrish. I just think Barron is like an all-around perfect scheme fit. Parrish is a very good like press man-to-man corner, while I think Barron is, more versatile and has, is better in zone for sure. And I would love to trade down. I think trading down would be great. I just always kind of push back on that a little bit, because for me, when I say to trade down, it always takes two to tango. So like you always have to rely on another team to trade down, and then if another team does want to trade up, are they actually giving you something of worth to trade down for? So trading down would be nice, but it is something that Chris Greer has not really done a lot of. So I haven't discussed it too much, just because it's not a big trend of his. Even though if I was GM, I would be trading down as much as I could, because I love having a lot of picks. Thoughts on Hollins, Pierce, and Oz? Yeah, honestly, they're kind of, both the guys you mentioned. They're kind of the Patrick Paul types of this class. Not as, I think, as Patrick Paul is a little bit different level of athlete than those guys, which I think is the reason Paul got drafted higher than I think those guys will. But they're kind of like the big, pretty good movers for their size type guys in their class. But I think there's just, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan